Got a jam-packed day here on 4 Verts. Busy Friday news dump type of day in the NFL. Coaching carousel updates. We got a QB rumor out there as well. And a couple of teams, one in particular, kind of just twiddling their thumbs right now. So we'll talk about all of it here on today's show. My name is Harrison Graham. We're bringing you daily NFL content, so hit that subscribe button. Our video yesterday got 15 new subscribers. What do you say we get 25? A little Friday positivity going into the weekend. If you want free NFL content, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we're going to have NFC and AFC championship game previews, so stay tuned for that here on the show. Okay, let's start with the first hiring that took place this morning. That, of course, is Pete Carroll, as the Raiders decide to go with the veteran. He actually becomes the oldest head coach in NFL history. He's 73 years old. He will turn 74 in September, right as the new season gets going next year, which, you know, on the surface, you're like, God, you're going to hire the oldest guy to ever be a head coach. I know it's a cliche and everyone says it, but it's really true with Pete. His energy is not one of a 73-year-old. It's more of like a 55-year-old. He's a guy that can stabilize a program, and he elevates your floor and just gives you credibility instantly in a very tough division. And when you're a team that's clearly in transition, the Raiders have a lot of work to do with their roster, not even to mention quarterback. And Pete Carroll can kind of help fill some of those gaps with his coaching and his ability to motivate in the short term when, let's face it, they're not ready to win right now, but he can elevate what they've been, I think, at a pretty quick amount of time here. I really like this hire for Las Vegas. I really, really do. I know they wanted Ben Johnson. I know they would have liked a Mike Vrabel, but Pete Carroll, I think, in the short term, is a pretty good move here. You think about the chaos that Vegas has been through. They took the swing on John Gruden. It wasn't going that well. It was slightly improving. Then the email stuff happens. Train wreck. They move on. And after that, they throw a bunch of money at Josh McDaniels. Second time around, he's just as bad as the first time. Fire him, still paying him. Then they give Antonio Pierce a shot. He's the interim guy that every player wants. Max Crosby, Devontae, they all want him. Well, by like week 5, Devontae Adams gets traded. It's a shit show. It goes so poorly, but they win a couple of meaningless games late in the year that it actually drops them out of position to get a quarterback in the NFL draft. So just all the way around, not a good situation. But Pete Carroll comes in, brings that stability, and you need that in this division. Andy Reid, Jim Harbaugh, Sean Payton, those guys have been around the block. So has Pete Carroll. Doesn't mean that Pete Carroll is going to elevate this Raiders team above those teams, but can they be more competitive? Can they elevate what their floor has been and say he's there for 3 years? Sounds like he got a 3-year with a 4th-year team option, and given his age, that makes sense. You know, reassess after 3 years, and if he wants to keep doing it and he has the energy to and they're ascending, cool. Give him a two-year extension. If by then it's time to hand it to someone else, I'll say this. I think, regardless of how this goes, Pete Carroll will leave the Raiders better than he found it. I think that's pretty safe to say. Now, the bar's not very high there, but I think it's also just a testament to who Pete is as a motivator, as a coach, as a teacher. Obviously, building this staff will be important. OC hire is critical. We'll see who they can get given their QB situation, but we'll have to wait and see. Speaking of quarterback, like Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson's not a long-term answer, although Pete will be there longer than Russ probably would. But could Wilson, be a Band-Aid, right? Could he be an elevation and an upgrade over a guy like Aiden O'Connell? I'll give Russ some credit, and there's a report out there, by the way, A, that this feels like a possibility, and B, that Russ and Pete Carroll, this is per Jeff Howe of The Athletic, they've made up. Remember, things got a little ugly late in Seattle before they traded him. Apparently, they're on good terms now, so that's a good sign and would increase the possibility of this happening. Ian Rappaport also put out there earlier today that Vegas is where Russ really wanted to go last offseason before he ended up in Pittsburgh. Unclear if the Steelers want to bring him back for another year or not. I'll say this, on a 1-year deal, I think Russ at this point in his career, he's not what he was, but I thought he played a little better than expected last year. I think as a year-to-year option, you could do a lot worse. Now, again, are you winning playoff games with Russ? No, but maybe you go from being a laughingstock to you're more competitive in games, and maybe you steal a game or two in the division. Maybe you go 7-10, and on a 1 or 2 year basis, he helps you out, and along with Pete Carroll, just elevates the status of your franchise. And within a couple of years, hopefully you have access to a long-term answer at quarterback. If you're a Raider fan, I don't think this is something you'd be jumping out of your seat for, but I do think he's an upgrade over Aiden O'Connell. I think indoors in a dome, because he doesn't move like he used to, and as the season went on in Pittsburgh, elements started to come into play. I think his effectiveness started to dip, but you get him in the AFC West indoors. Obviously, you got road games, or you'll have a road game against the Chargers, which is indoors. Like, you'll play some warm weather games, and you'll be in a decent position for him to play at least at a serviceable level. They have a good tight end in Brock Bowers. I would expect them to try and target a receiver at some point in the draft. So I could see this happening. Again, the offensive coordinator will be interesting to see what they do there. Okay, let's go to the Jags. It just became official, actually, but this was negotiated overnight. Liam Coen is, in fact, going to be the Jaguars' next head coach in a wild turn, a wild twist. It was a crazy 48 hours for this whole situation. Let's just kind of run through the timeline here. So 2 days ago, it was reported that Liam Coen turned down the Jags, pulled his name out of consideration, and that he would go back to Tampa and become one of, if not the highest paid offensive coordinator in the NFL. We found out today that would have been about $4 million. A lot of money for a coordinator, which, hey, I wouldn't have blamed him. The Trent Baalke situation, I can go make $4 million, keep coaching Baker Mayfield, get another year under my belt, then get a head coaching job next year. Makes sense. Well, then the Jags fire Trent Baalke. Shad Khan says, you know what? Baalke has cost me Ben Johnson. He's cost me a shot at Liam Coen. I'm going to fire Trent Baalke, and then I'm going to call Liam Coen back. We didn't know that the day they fired Baalke, but yesterday breadcrumbs started to emerge, and clearly they had recontacted Coen and said, hey, Baalke's out of the way. We want you, and you can have input on who the GM's going to be. That got him back to the table. They offered him a bunch of money. Sounds like he's going to get a Ben Johnson type of deal, 12, 13 million bucks per year, which is obviously more than $4 million bucks. So I do just want to say this right off the bat, because there's been a lot of blame going around. I get it. If you're a Bucs fan, you're like, what the hell, man? You said this, you're doing that. I don't blame Liam Coen here. He clearly wanted this job from the beginning, but he was uncomfortable with Trent Baalke, so he pulled out. Well, the Jags said, hey, what if we get Baalke out of the way? That would bring me back to the table. Now, we don't know the ins and outs of what the communication was between Coen and the Bucs and Todd Bowles and all that stuff. I know there's theories flying around. We'll see if we ever get the full truth there. These things can get messy sometimes. It just, it's part of business, right? Like, it's not always crispy clean. But if you're Liam Coen, your salary is going to triple. I mean, you get an opportunity to become a head coach. Sure, you could go back for another year. What if it doesn't go well next year? Look at Bobby Slowik, who we're going to talk about here in a minute. He went from being hot head coach candidate, goes back to Houston, now he's fired. You just never know when your opportunity is going to come. So if I'm Liam Coen, sure, maybe there was ways it could have been handled better, but I'm just not going to blame him in this situation. I don't know what exactly happened, but I think it's just one of those things where sometimes things get ugly. Now, this is a little shady, and I think you're seeing a larger issue with these coaching cycles, with the Rooney Rule, and how teams are just manipulating it to get the guy who they want, yada, yada, yada. It was reported today, I think Albert Breer had this, that the Jags, they recontact Coen and made it clear that they were going to hire him, like they made it clear to him, but they kept that under wraps because they had not fully complied with the Rooney Rule. Patrick Graham, who was scheduled to fly in yesterday, they went ahead and let him fly in, conduct that second interview, which cleared the pathway for Coen. Now, all these teams do this to an extent. I mean, the Bears interviewing Eddie George, he was never going to be the head coach. I get it. I'm not acting like this one is necessarily like, I'm not acting like this is the only time this has happened. But this one's a little like, wait a second. The guy who you wanted said no. You fire the GM. You bring in Coen back in. You recontact him. It's clear you're going to hire him. And you still have Patrick Graham fly in. Like, here's the thing, and this is a harsh reality. Eddie George knows going in he's got no shot. Patrick Graham, who's been a longtime defensive coordinator in the NFL, when he sees Liam Coen's pulled out and he knows it's only him and Robert Saleh scheduled to have second interviews, he's probably thinking he's got a shot at that job. And in this case, he had no shot at the job because they were secretly going to hire Liam Coen, who publicly, it was reported, had pulled his name out of the race. So I don't know if the NFL is going to look into this situation specifically. I do think in general they're going to have to reassess the Rooney Rule because the purpose of it was to give minority candidates fair shots. I think now, though, you're seeing that there's incentives for teams to hire minority coaches. One, there's a ton of qualified ones. You've seen plenty of minority coaches have a high level of success in this league. But two, you're also seeing the incentives for those guys to get hired because if your coordinator or assistant GM or et cetera becomes a GM, becomes a head coach, the team that he was in gets compensatory draft picks. So maybe they just do away with the Rooney Rule. Maybe they tweak it. But this thing where you can just not tell a guy that you're already hiring someone who's a qualified candidate in Patrick Graham, make him fly over anyway and just do this fake interview. I mean, who is that helping? It's not helping anybody. So I don't know how you fix it. I don't know what you do, but that's not cool for Patrick Graham, a guy who's, he's built some calluses in this league. Again, Eddie George, I'm not trying to make slight of Eddie George. He's the Tennessee State head coach. Like, maybe down the road he's an NFL head coach, but he's not making that leap. Like, he knows that going in. That's probably a situation where he's like, hey, I get some interview experience. I get on the Bears' radar. Maybe they put a good word in me for another team down the road for an assistant coach. Hell, maybe I'm in play to be the running backs coach. Who knows? This Patrick Graham thing, though, I mean, he's probably throwing the double birds at Shad Khan today, right? Like, that's not great. So we'll see how the NFL looks at that whole situation. Okay, I mentioned it, but Bobby Slowik has been let go, and how quickly things can change in 12 months. This time last year, he was a red-hot head coaching candidate. There was real chatter he was going to get a job last year, did some interviews, even got a head coaching interview with the Jets this year, did not get it. I didn't think he'd get one this year, and we heard earlier in the week that DeMeco Ryans was going to take the week to kind of review the rest of his coaching staff and make decisions by the end of the week on who would return, who would stay. And the chatter was like, that sounds like he's going to make a decision on Bobby Slowik. It was reported a little bit ago that C.J. Stroud was frustrated with some of the offensive things that Slowik did this year. So just crazy how quickly these things can change. I mean, he had C.J. Stroud looking like a top 5 quarterback last year as a rookie. And this year, while he wasn't terrible, clearly took a little bit of a step back. Offense wasn't as smooth. The O-line play was bad. I do think that's legitimate. And, I think Slowik is a bright young mind. I would expect him to land somewhere as an OC, but things can change quickly in this league. And it kind of goes back to that Coen thing. It's like, can I really blame him even if it wasn't handled perfectly? You got to strike while the iron is hot. If you get a job offer for an opportunity you think is worthwhile, you got to take it. I mean, I think if Bobby Slowik found an opportunity last year he liked and got offered, he would have gone because a year later, things don't go your way. All of a sudden, you're out of a job. So we'll see where he lands moving forward. All right, lastly, or second to lastly, I should say, is Mike McCarthy going to be the Saints head coach? They've had a ton of snow in New Orleans for their levels, historic, and they haven't been able to fly coaches in. But today and through the weekend and early into next week, they're going to compile some second interviews for McCarthy. It'll be his first, but kind of like his interview with the Bears, it'll almost be like a second interview. If they like what they see, he could very well get a job offer. Adam Schefter hopped on McAfee today and said McCarthy makes a lot of sense there. That's a name he's hearing a lot. And I agree. I think if you go through this interview with McCarthy, if you're the Saints, and he says I'm in, just sign him up. Like, he's kind of a younger offensive version of Pete Carroll. Are you winning a Super Bowl with him? Probably not. But you're probably not winning a Super Bowl with anyone right now if you're the Saints. You're in cap hell. You got this Derek Carr situation where you're probably going to have to cut him, which means you don't know who the quarterback is going to be next year. It's going to take a couple years to get this back in the right direction. I would trust a guy like Mike McCarthy to help you get there. So, and I think he elevates your floor in the short term while you're going through this transition. So I think it would be a good fit for both sides looking at this situation in New Orleans. And then that leaves us Dallas, McCarthy's old stop. It was reported last night that Jerry had talked to Pete Carroll about the opening. I don't know if it was a formal interview or just a conversation, but obviously that ship has sailed. He's going to Las Vegas to be the Raiders head coach. And so the only name we continue to hear is Brian Schottenheimer. He's the only guy who's done 2 interviews. They had Robert Saleh interview, Kellen Moore interview. Little birdie told me that Kellen Moore said no thanks. Maybe that changes, who knows. But Jerry, they're just, Steven, they're just sitting around. I mean, are they just going to hire Schotty? Are they going to wait for the conference championship games to go? Maybe you try to get Kellen to get back to the table. I'm not sure. But I thought Colin Cowherd made a good point on his FS1 show today that assistant coaches are starting to get hired. Like Pete Carroll is going to hit the ground running hiring coaches. Mike Vrabel has already filled his OC, DC, and a couple of position coaches already. Like these teams have a head start on Dallas, who we don't even know who the head coach is going to be. And if it's Brian Schottenheimer, that's not super inspiring. But whoever it is, you got to get good assistants in there too. It doesn't seem like they know what they're doing. And look, I've kind of alluded to it. I'll say it again here. I think if I'm Jerry, I would beg McCarthy to come back to the table. Like, Mike, we thought we would have this figured out. We don't. We'll offer more money than we did. 3-4-year deal, $10 million a year. What do you say? You come back, bring back most of your staff, run it however you want. I don't think Jerry's going to do that, though. Ego's too big. So just a mess in Dallas. And those fans, I mean, you got to feel bad almost. It's like, how do you get excited if you're a Cowboys fan? I mean, you just feel like there's no hope that they're going to get this thing right, that Jerry's just, he's like peak Al Davis now, end years Al Davis, where it's off the rails. So, yeah, we'll monitor that situation. Obviously, the Saints as well as the days go on. Okay, that's going to do it for this edition of Four Verts. A lot of coaching carousel news, rumors floating out there. We will continue to update you on those. Conference championship previews and predictions tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. We'll see you guys then here on Four Verts. Subscribe.